I'm Sophie Seita, and I'm a research fellow in English at Queen's and in the English faculty here. And I just finished a book called Provisional Avant-Gardes, which proposes a new feminist theory of the avant-garde through the medium of the magazine. And my next project looks at contemporary queer and feminist performance practices, so live poetry readings or recordings, but also performance art in a visual art context. And I also have a creative practice, so I'm an artist working with performance and text and video, and often also in multimedia collaborations.
Why do you research queer studies?
I think it was actually through researching avant-garde communities through these magazines, very interdisciplinary communities, so artists, writers, photographers, musicians, editors and readers all coming together, and sort of many of them publishing sort of underground work, not in the mainstream press, and many of them also highlighted the work of feminist or queer artists and writers, but maybe were then forgotten by the canon. So part of my work was interested in recuperating some of those voices. And I think I'm taking that on board again for this next project, looking at contemporary performance practices. I think in both works I'm really interested in how we can change editorial practices, contemporary curatorial practices and reading practices by focusing more on queer and feminist artists and writers. And also because I noticed, by doing some archival work, but also talking to collaborators of mine, sort of through my own experience, that it's sort of archival attrition disproportionately affects women, non-binary writers or artists and thinkers, or queer writers and editors. And so part of this work is this kind of, re-encountering that work and sort of elevating it. And maybe they were also very important historically and have been forgotten. So this is what drove me to that work, I think.
Have you ever faced challenges in queer research or teaching?
I haven't faced any challenges in my research or talking about it, or in teaching. I actually find that my students are incredibly political and very engaged and committed, especially here, and I don't know, I just think, for example, so many of my students have these stickers on their laptops that say trans women are women, and they're just kind of really alert. And but I think maybe one challenge I don't even know if it's a challenge, but I think what I've noticed, both in my creative practice, but also observing other artists or friends of mine, is that the responses you sometimes get after a performance or can be quite gendered, or that that people ask you, was it necessary to emphasize, that this is feminist or that this is queer, or did you have to highlight, your identity in this way? Is that important? So that there's still something, was that, or why do people have to wear, why do they wear lipstick? If this is, things like that. So that these kinds of prejudices are still present. I think that's a challenge, that, or conversely, that I think people are, just only read through this kind of an identity category, that they're not just an artist, but they're a woman artist or they're a queer artist, and not taken seriously in their own right, maybe, but It's also interesting that through performance, and all of my performances are based on research or on literary reading, archival reading, thinking about history, but of course I'm taking that work to a broader audience, and of course there's a large portion of people who come either because they know my work or they're interested in feminist and queer issues, but there are also people who are not queer, not feminist, or not particularly, might be more interested in other elements that I'm dealing with in this kind of multidisciplinary practice. But so the challenge is to sort of, how do you speak to different people? How do you get people to understand maybe why some of these issues are equally important, or how they intersect with other interests? And so this performance that we did at the New Hall Art Collection through Sarah's project on reproductivities, for example, would be one example. That there would be some people there who were interested in Barbara McClintock and in the scientific element, or maybe people who were interested in some of those questions from a sociological perspective. So how do you bring these together or make it accessible and interesting and engaging and exciting and provocative to different audiences?
Why is it important to have a queer curriculum?
I think it's important to have a very diverse curriculum because our world doesn't just consist of one spectrum of humanity, of one kind of particular identity category, and we can't just assume that white men sort of are the universal. And so I think we need to hear lots of different stories, and this is what a curriculum can do that is more queer and more diverse, to showcase the variety of work that people have produced over centuries and are producing now. But I also think a queer curriculum means taking a queer approach to reading and writing and thinking. So it's not just about highlighting canonical or archival or historical invisibilities, or but also to think about how can we create something, how can we shape thinking, thinking forward in terms of into the future. What can we change? That there's greater variety in publishing now, or in thinking and writing. So I think taking a queer approach to the curriculum would also mean to create a more hospitable classroom atmosphere. Asking people for their pronouns. How do they want to be addressed? How do they want to present themselves and think about themselves? And also I try to ask students what they want. I mean, what do they want from this degree, from being here? Rather than just imposing, a list of important authors or scholars or artworks, and they just have to kind of learn them by rote, certain facts or figures. And also, I think to create maybe a kind of non-hierarchical environment in which people can think and just maybe not yet know where they're going. A kind of provisional pedagogy. A provisional and hospitable pedagogy. So I think it all comes down to hospitality.
How do you queer the curriculum?
I think what I just mentioned, I think this is one way of queering the curriculum by asking students questions rather than imposing a particular model of what a queer curriculum is or what a curriculum is, full stop. And also I think I'm very interested in combining critical and creative approaches to teaching and a kind of experimental pedagogy. So for example, I taught this course on experimental writing by women, experimental art and writing by women, an MPhil course, and the students produced a magazine, and then we launched the magazine, thinking through some of these issues that we discussed in class. So it was a kind of homage to all these women that we studied, but engaging in conversation with them through writing, a dialogue in print. And then it was then also performed live, a kind of live dialogue, and creating this community, both in the classroom and then beyond, this imaginary community with these writers, with these female writers. So I responded to the exhibition at the New Hall Art Collection called Reproductivities, thinking about reproductive technologies and queer kinship. And the exhibition was centered around the work of the geneticist Barbara McClintock, who discovered the concept of transposition, which describes horizontal gene transfer. So rather than sort of going from parent to offspring, there's a horizontality. And this horizontality is also something that queer theory has been thinking about a lot in the last few years, and I was interested in this horizontality on the level of performance and also in terms of choreography, transposition as this horizontal movement. And in music, transposition means that you change from one key into another, and again to take that as a concept and take it into a performance practice, and to think about how can we translate or transform, transpose queer thinking into different contexts, and to utilize performance to do that.